Everyone, welcome to Instagram for Friday.
That's right, it's Friday. Yeah!
Yes!
Is it okay? You feeling good there?
The subject of crunch has been a big topic lately in the gaming industry.
Actually, if we're being honest, it's always been a big topic.
Yeah, if you don't know what we're talking about, crunch, the practice of employees having to put in extremely long hours to meet deadlines.
Yep, video games take a lot of work, and sometimes those work hours can get absolutely brutal, leading to burnout or even people going to the hospital.
Yeah, crunch has been a part of video games from the earliest days, and of course, it's still with us.
But in the age of social media, employees are starting to share their stories and draw attention to the working conditions in the industry.
Yeah, Lawrence, what's going on?
It's really fascinating. This has kind of been something that's just assumed, part and parcel of the games industry for a long time. If you're going to be in game development, you're going to crunch. That's been questioned a lot more lately, and actually a lot of workers are calling for unionization, which led to some developers and companies vowing to do better. Whether or not anything will change, though, is still a huge question, because for a lot of people, the system still works. But we got a lot of headlines lately, so we'll just take a recap on all of it and see where we're at. Crunch was back in the headlines recently. Kotaku ran a story about the development of Black Ops 4. It included nearly a dozen former and current employees of Treyarch that said they were crunched quite a bit to put the game out last year. Especially true for the QA testers, who were the contract employees tasked with spotting bugs in the game.
In the article, they talk about how they regularly work 12-hour days, including on weekends, and it sounds like they were treated like second-class citizens compared to the permanent staffers.
According to the story, some said they've been working around 70 hours a week for the past year or so.
Yeah. Oh, and they did say that the office turned off the air conditioning at night, leading to 90 degrees plus temperatures.
That's just mean. I don't know what, that's just mean.
One tester said, quote, a couple of jokes were made about sweatshops and all that, but it's terrifying because it kind of was sometimes, especially in the dead of July.
Yeah, and with Treyarch now back on the clock to make a new Black Ops game by 2020, that's a strong possibility that even more crunching will be involved, right, Lawrence?
Yes, and that sounds pretty brutal, but it's not just Treyarch has been accused of brutal work practices. There's just been a rash of them lately. Employees of some of the biggest studios in video games have gone on the record with their stories of long work hours, including Epic Games, which makes Fortnite, and Rockstar Games, home of the Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption franchises. And full disclosure here, we've actually had some people ask about this. Rooster Teeth Animation Department has been accused of crunching staffers too. Another full disclosure thing, we're actually not going to cover that because it doesn't have to do with games. Also, it's a separate department, so there's a couple of reasons why it doesn't actually factor into what we cover here. We like to keep it to games and only games. Just so you guys know, that's kind of why we haven't touched that one. But as for video games, it's probably a safe bet that a lot of the games you played, and especially like the timelines and the prices they come out with, are the product of crunch.
I would say almost every game.
Yeah, so we have silently benefited from the system for a long time, and maybe it's just time to be aware of that.
Polygon reported that the big growth of Fortnite led to months of crunch for Epic employees and contractors, saying they regularly worked more than 70-hour weeks.
Yeah, and last year at Rockstar, there was a mini controversy after one of these studio heads said they regularly put in 100-hour weeks on Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yeah, some Rockstar employees told Kotaku that they worked 55 to 60-hour weeks on the game, with some saying they'd been asked or felt compelled to work nights and weekends.
Yeah, there was also crunch involved in the making of Anthem, with one developer saying that, quote, it felt like the entire game was basically built in the last 6 to 9 months.
Boy,
Yeah, it feels like that on this side too.
Oh, you burned them.
It just sucks that people had to sacrifice so much of their lives.
And then they get shit on.
Yeah, I feel so bad for that, but God, that game was not great.
No, the game wasn't good.
Sorry BioWare, you guys tried so
Well,
hard.
BioWare even had a term for the grueling pace that employees worked up until the game release. They called it BioWare Magic.
That's
bullshit.
That's kind of insulting.
Yeah, when an executive's like, don't worry about it, we got that BioWare magic. Anyway, see ya.
90-hour weeks, is that what you're talking about? The
and
magic?
Meanwhile, yeah, there's somebody who's worked 100-hour weeks, like bags under their eyes, their palm against the glass as he peels out down the interstate.
Yeah, but we get a big bonus at the end of the game. Residual checks for...
Can't hear ya!
More recently, Variety published an expose about all the crunch involved in Mortal Kombat 11.
One employee at NetherRealm Studios said that he and others at the studio worked 60 to 70 hours per week since January. And even after Mortal Kombat 11 was released, the crunch still continued as employees worked to patch things like glitches, exploits, and to fix issues involving the game's currencies. Because Lord knows people were yelling about that stuff.
Yeah, they were.
There's too many coins, not enough coins, whatever. Some full-timers said that they were living in the studio, literally sleeping on offices or inflatable sofas. Not surprisingly, this has led to more people discussing the possibility of unionizing the games industry.
That's why unions started in the first place, was to protect workers.
All those children's little hands getting in the gears.
Emma Kinema, one of the organizers behind Game Workers Unite, said that, quote, crunch is certainly one of the most public and tangible issues around which workers are calling for unionization and labor organizing in the industry.
It's also led to some developers to talk more about the issue of long work hours.
Yeah, some say that crunch has always been a fact of life in the industry, and I think we would probably agree with that as well. Bless you.
Sorry.
To bill you for that.
No.
Yeah, you're working late tonight.
Talk to my union guy. Wait. Bethesda director Todd Howard told IGN that, quote, "We've been through every type of crunch you can imagine." He said that in the past, some crunch was very difficult for a lot of us personally, with your time and your health and things like that.
Yeah, Blizzard co-founder Mike Morhaime said that the crunch was common in the early days of the studio, saying that, quote, "We crunched crazy hours to get those games done."
He also added that the studio owes its success to crunch, saying, "I don't think we would have been as successful if we hadn't put in everything that we had."
And therein lies the problem, is that everybody puts in a lot of their time and effort, passion, and all other stuff. They make a great game, it comes out, it sells really well. Well, then you're rewarding that system of crunch.
Well, yeah, because we get is the final product, and we go, "Thank you, you made it, I played it, I'm done." You didn't see the blood, sweat, and tears that went into that thing. So
Yeah. What else did Morhaime say?
Nowadays, Morhaime said that crunch isn't sustainable, and companies are doing better these days, quote, where people aren't working 24/7. Howard also said some things have changed at Bethesda. Going back to that, he said that Bethesda's gotten, quote, much better at managing crunch, but he did say that he thought that, quote, every game deserves some amount of crunch at the very end. Howard said, quote, some amount of that is healthy. Don't leave it all on the field because it's important to us. It's important to our fans. You've just got to make sure it's communicated really well.
And also paid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Make
I
sure
think
your
people are getting
employees-
paid for their time.
Make sure your employees are paid.
Sure, yeah, we've all had overtime, shoots go late or you have long days, and it's, yes, time and a half. That's
Supposed to happen.
that's what the unions do.
Yeah, they make sure you get paid.
So while studio bosses are saying the right things about crunch, that culture is still pretty ingrained in the industry.
Other developers feel like they have to crunch to meet fans' expectations, just like we've been talking about.
Right, yeah. Path of Exile developer Grinding Gear Games, app name, said in a Reddit post that sometimes, quote, "We feel that we are being asked to crunch by our fans."
But despite those pressures, we're seeing some hopeful signs that other developers are taking legit steps to combat crunch. Lawrence, what's going on over there?
Yeah, it's happening in some of the biggest studios. Bungie has made headlines recently when studio officials said they would delay a patch in Destiny 2 because of crunch considerations.
Okay, that's good.
So this is one of those instances where I can understand grinding gears when they say they feel like they have to crunch because people want their fixes, they want their patches, they
Right.
want it all now. And it can be difficult to go back to them and say, we have to go home and eat with our families, so you'll have to wait a little bit. But luckily, those communication lines are starting to open and Bungie's kind of leading the way on that, which is awesome. Creative director Luke Smith said in a live stream that, quote, "We could ask people to work super long hours and add this thing in. We're having the conversation about, is it worth doing that, or is it worth preserving work-life balance and ship it later in July?" He added, quote, "It's always a cost-benefit analysis for people who are working super hard."
There's something that a lot of these companies don't talk about, which is what happens if they delay those patches or the game or whatever. People might move on to other games. It may not sell as well, and then they may not have jobs. That's the thing that I think everybody's thinking but doesn't actually say.
Yeah, and like we said in the beginning of the episode, what has changed is the communication and the access that you have to a developer or a
right.
personality or anything like that. So where it used to be, people would just vote with their wallets and just ignore you. At least now there is some sort of form of communication where you can say, look, we're gonna be transparent and just say this is how it is, and hopefully people will just be more forgiving.
If you like Destiny 2 and they tweet out, hey, we're going to do this because we don't want to crunch our employees, well, ideally you stick around and you go, you know what? That's okay. I'll wait. I will buy that expansion when you release it. The reality situation is, as a player, you may not, but, maybe hopefully you will.
Yeah, especially if you're in a marketplace with other developers that are crunching and they get a game out faster and it has more content because they did that. Then yeah, it's on you to sort of make a decision as a consumer of
A
these
moral
products.
decision as a consumer.
Yeah, and I don't know that a lot of people are one inclined to even think on that level about the games. They just, what can I get for my money? And that's where it ends. So it kind of makes sense the system got where it is. And I don't know that this is actually going to change a whole lot. We'll see.
Well, I don't know, yeah. As a company, Bungie has been working for a while to try and eliminate crunch, which was once pretty common for them.
Yeah, some of its best known games like Halo 2, Adam.
Good game.
Adam was the cause of
Yeah.
crunch. He was the one they were crunching for.
You did it.
Maybe, I guess.
Bungie head of engineering Luke Timmons said there was a brutal 18-month stretch leading up to the launch of Halo 2 in 2004 that almost killed Bungie as a company.
Yeah, he described it by saying, quote, "It is the most I've ever seen humans work in a year and a half."
For Adam.
They did it for me. It was brutal. It almost killed us. And those of us that were left basically vowed, never again can we put ourselves through that.
For Adam.
Why does it end? It just ends. He says finish the fight and then it just, what happened?
Judging by this Destiny 2 patch, it looks like Bungie's trying to do better, right, Lawrence?
There's been some signs. Like, it's hard to tell if it's like companies just getting a little PR cred while they can, while they were doing delays that might have happened anyway. On a similar note, Nintendo recently announced they'll delay the new Animal Crossing game until March 20th of next year, also because of crunch.
Yep.
Nintendo of America President Doug Bowser said they didn't want to push employees to get it done sooner.
Yeah, Autumn.
Yeah, she doesn't know anything about crunch.
Bowser told IGN, quote, "It's really important that we have the balance in our world. It's actually something we're proud of."
Others have also said that things are improving as well.
Magnus Deadforce, the director of Rage 2, was asked last year about crunch, and he said that the practice has changed tremendously over the years.
Yeah, he said, quote, "There is no point in working 16 hours a day. Of course, you can do it for a couple days when something super important needs to get done, but even 10 or 12 hours a day, the last few hours of that period, you're not effective. You are more effective if you go home, rest, take it easy." And then what he didn't say at the end was, come back to work work refreshed, because then you'll do better work. It'll be more efficient.
Make fewer mistakes that end up costing you more time in the end.
You gotta recharge that battery, man. It's all good. Industry veteran Mike Wilson, who co-founded Devolver Digital, said he's seen the brutal effects of crunch, recalling that he's worked with indie developers who have been hospitalized during a game's development.
Oh my gosh. Wilson said that some kind of collective action is needed to solve the problem. He said, quote, whether it's through unions or simply wising up for how hard people need to work every day to reach maximum creativity, the answer is definitely not more hours. We don't do our best work when we're malnourished or exhausted or depressed.
Some people would beg to differ.
Yeah, or through adversity, I guess. I don't know, man.
He added, we have to remove the asbestos from the factory we're working in to make these games. We have to fix it.
Going forward, what's going to go on with crunch, Lawrence? What do you think?
It's hard to see it getting eliminated with this or any kind of job like this. There's going to be some element where you have to come in and like put in the work to get something done on time and on budget. When crunch stories like these pop up, developers typically say they were addressing the problem, and then a year later we'll read another story about crunch. So I think on some level it's unavoidable. I think awareness is the key, and then mostly just for the consuming populace, if they choose to make a decision about it or become aware of it, they can. It's just hard to imagine the system as it is now rewarding somebody who puts out a product later with less content being rewarded by the market.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just sort of a symptom of the type of creative product that they're making. You see this a lot because in the early stages, everything's sort of nebulous and floating around. There's no real solid vision. And towards the end, the vision is clear. It's becoming more clear. And so the crunch is refinement. It's very rare that anyone goes in right away and goes,
Starts crunching right away?
yeah, we know what this is going to look like. I mean, there's some sort of like established franchises like Star Wars maybe, where it's like J.J. Abrams has a pretty clear vision of what it's going to be, so people can work on that pretty fast. But a lot of times game development, like the beginning of God of War, they kind of knew where they were going with it, and it took 5-6 years to make that thing because that's just how it goes.
Typically, you have an idea, you have a gut feeling about what might work, you make a prototype, you see if it works, and if it does, you keep going down that path. Or you start iterating. You start tweaking things until it feels right. But yeah, you're right. We like to think that at the end of a game, everyone involved knew exactly what it was going to look like when
No
they started.
way.
Good God, no. So yeah, especially when like you're trying to make art and then the art systems are changing, the game design systems are changing all under you while you're working too. It's not a surprise that crunch is kind of necessary at the end when everyone sort of starts to align and push in one direction.
Whether it's through social media, the press, or unionizing, it seems like workers are taking a more active role in sharing their stories, which is good.
Yeah, and hopefully that will be enough to prompt some change in an industry that definitely needs some of that.
Yeah, doesn't need a little bit of change.
Let's not, hey, you know what? You live once. Let's not,
YOLO.
yeah, well, not that kind of YOLO. It's more like slow low. Like,
Hey, that's slow.
Stop and smell the Rolos.
We'll
yeah.
call it BioWare Slow-Lo.
Have a good weekend, everyone. See you next.
It's just as nasty as when it's fatality.
Wow, capitalism mentality.
Good job. Wage slaveality. Yeah.
I moved out of my parents' house for this mentality.
Dang.
Is that about the developers or me?
In the last week, we've seen several articles about working conditions at NetherRealm Studios, which makes two well-known fighting franchises